for the topic that was assigned. It's called the balanced way. And I want to speak a little bit about balance in our practice of Dhamma, both in terms of our internal practice and the way we have to embody Dhamma in our practice in today's world. Now, I think it's significant that the Buddha calls his teaching the middle way because it avoids extremes. And usually the middle way is formulated in the classical text, the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta, as avoiding the two extremes of self-indulgence or indulgence in sensual pleasures, and the extreme of self-mortification, of tormenting oneself with the belief that it's through the extreme ascetic practices that one can reach liberation. But there are many subtle dimensions to the middle way. And I'd say one expression, one embodiment of the middle way, in a particular teaching or set of guidelines for cultivation that the Buddha laid down, called the 5 spiritual faculties. The 5 spiritual faculties are, using the English word, well, first I'll use the Pali word and the English rendering. Saddha, virya, sati, samadhi, and panya. And in English, these would be faith, energy or effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom or insight. And if we look at the structure or the layout of the 5 spiritual faculties, we see that they're arranged in such a way that the faculty of mindfulness, sati, comes in the middle. And so this is the way I understand it. It's not sheer coincidence. It's not that these factors are laid out arbitrarily. But sati comes in the middle because its job is to establish the balanced way, to establish a harmonization and collaboration of the 5 spiritual faculties. Now, these 5 spiritual faculties take on different manifestations, both in our day-to-day life, as well as in different forms of religious practice and cultivation. But if these faculties are not held in balance, are not coordinated with one another, then each one can develop a trajectory of its own. And in this way, one can get either a morbid form of spirituality or an excessive expression, a rather agitated or disturbed expression of spirituality. And if one follows those trajectories, then one will be led away from the final goal, away from the true realization of liberation. But it is because in the Buddha Dharma, these 5 spiritual faculties are to be held in balance, that each one is able to contribute in its own significant way, its own distinctive contribution to the unfolding and culmination of the spiritual practice, the spiritual path. It's also significant that the Buddha begins the 5 spiritual faculties with faith. So let us use the Pali word saddha, but the exact translation of this is sometimes a matter of debate or disagreement. But I prefer the word, some have used, suggested using confidence or trust. But I find, in my way of looking, that those seem a bit weak and lack that strong emotional punch that the word saddha, that the word faith has. But the word faith for Buddhism, it doesn't mean blindly accepting certain doctrines as infallible dogmas. But rather, faith means a personal commitment, an act of trust by which one commits oneself to the objects of faith, which are the triple gems, the three rules. And so faith in Buddhism begins, properly it begins with experimentation, with inquiry, with investigation. Because one wants to find out, one doesn't just want to latch onto this teaching blindly without any questioning, but rather one approaches the Dhamma with questions, in the spirit of inquiry, to find out whether this teaching is capable of leading one to the experience of truth, whether it is capable of leading one to liberation. And when one approaches the Dhamma in this way, one has to, even from the very beginning, have some insight, some understanding of what it is that causes one to live in suffering. Usually we come to the Dhamma seeking a way out of suffering. And so one has an intuitive sense, I would say, that there is something within oneself that is keeping one trapped in suffering. And when one arrives at the three jewels, either through seeing, sometimes it comes just through seeing images of the Buddha or hearing stories about the life of the Buddha, meaning representatives of the Buddha's teaching, members of the Sangha, monastic Sangha, but especially when one encounters the Dhamma, then one sees a clear explanation of the nature of human existence, so that one understands that one's own suffering is not just a freak accident that's happening to you, but it's something which is common to all forms of life, something shared by all sentient beings. One also sees that the Dhamma is teaching that the cause of suffering lies within oneself, and that it's possible to break free from this suffering by following a particular path of training. So when one encounters these truths, through one's inquiry, through one's questioning, through one's investigation, at a certain point, one is willing to entrust oneself, even though one might still have questions, still have doubts, but one makes that personal commitment to take the Buddha as one's teacher, as the guide along the path to liberation, to take the Dharma as the instruction, the map of the path, or the particular codes that one is going to follow in order to realize one's goals. And then one seeks out guidance from the Sangha, from good, wise teachers who could help one along the path. So in this way, faith becomes then, so it grows from inquiry, grows from investigation, but once that faith becomes rooted, then it becomes a very powerful potential which can bring forth all the later stages of development and realization along the path. And so the Buddha speaks about, he says, samkha yuja. Faith is the seed. So when we plant the seed in the ground, I like to use the example of an acorn, which when you have an acorn, it's very small, when it just enfolds the acorn within your hand. But if you plant that acorn in the ground, then rain will fall, the ground will, the soil will nurture that acorn, and so over the years that acorn will start to grow, to send out the trunk, it will send out branches until it becomes a giant oak tree. And think the example of an acorn in an oak tree